Karen, the HOA president, decided her daily commute mattered more than my ranch. Buckle up, because this story involves a fence, a dash of insanity, and ends with a sheriff's visit you won't soon forget. I always figured life on a ranch meant peace, quiet, and the occasional move from my herd. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be dealing with an HOA Karen who treats her morning drive like a NASCAR event. But here we are. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday. Birds chirping, cows grazing, and me sipping coffee while admiring my favorite feature, the fence. That fence wasn't just boards and nails. It was the guardian of my cattle kingdom. But to HOA President Karen, it was apparently a personal inconvenience. Now, let me explain. Karen has an obsession with shortcuts. She studies traffic like NASA studies rocket launches. And according to her data, my fence was blocking the fastest route to her favorite road, all to skip one measly stoplight. So one fine morning, without so much as a text or a knock, she took a saw to it. Not politely. Not with permission. Just humming away like a Disney villain as she cut straight through. I first noticed something was off when my cows started acting a little too free-spirited. They weren't grazing where they should be. They were exploring. And by exploring, I mean casually strolling into what Karen proudly calls her landscaped paradise. There's nothing quite like watching a 900-pound cow inspect someone's petunias. A little nibble here, a toppled gnome there, while Karen screams like she's auditioning for a horror movie. "My flowers! My yard, my rights!" she screeched. And that's when I realized Karma had a sense of humor. I tried calling her, calmly suggesting, "Hey, Karen, maybe check your gate before a cow eats your tulips." She ignored me, probably too busy drafting a complaint to the HOA about my aggressive livestock. At that point, I knew I had to handle things myself. If Karen thought she could slice through my fence and walk away unscathed, she was about to meet both the law and my cows. Picture me in boots and a hat, waving my arms at 3 cows who clearly thought they'd been invited to a garden party. It was pure chaos, slow-motion comedy at its finest. The cows, majestic and clueless, trampled her flower beds, tipped her flamingos while Karen flailed and screamed. Meanwhile, I was on the phone with 911 saying, yes. I think my cows are filing a lawsuit against my neighbor." The dispatcher was understandably confused, but promised to send someone. Meanwhile, my cows decided to encircle Karen's prized gnome collection like a fuzzy security detail. It was part rodeo, part nature documentary, and all absurd. Then the sheriff arrived. I braced for a lecture about livestock control, but instead he glanced from Karen to the cows and said, deadpan, "Ma'am, your HOA bylaws don't apply to livestock trespassing. Looks like you're liable for the damages." Karen's face went through every human emotion: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, outrage. My cows looked at me like, well, that went better than expected. By sunset, the fence was repaired, the herd was home, and Karen had learned a costly lesson about fences, arrogance, and karma. As for me, I had a story good enough to make any comedian choke on their coffee. The moral? Never mess with a rancher's fence, unless you want Karma to show up wearing hooves and escorted by a sheriff with a smirk. But just when I thought it was over, Karen's next stunt took things from ridiculous to downright chaotic. Buckle up, because the cows weren't finished yet. Yet neither I nor Karen were finished. After the sheriff left, I could see it brewing, that look in her eyes, the kind that said she wasn't done losing yet. She stood there on her porch glaring at my freshly repaired fence like it had personally insulted her ancestors. I thought, maybe this will finally teach her something. But no. In Karen's world, the only lesson worth learning is one that makes everyone else miserable first. The next morning, I walked out with my coffee, expecting peace. Instead, I heard a strange buzzing sound, or like a lawnmower having an existential crisis. I peeked over the fence, and there she was, Karen, standing in her yard with hedge clippers, trimming her bushes at the perfect angle to, you guessed it, extend her shortcut right back across my property. It was like watching someone try to play Jenga using other people's patience. Before I could stop her, my cows noticed. Still feeling confident after their last adventure, one in particular, Bessie the Brave, locked eyes on Karen's perfectly sculpted petunias. In slow motion, Bessie charged. Flowers flew. Shrubs toppled. Karen screamed a word I'm pretty sure isn't in any polite language. I dashed over, flailing my arms like a rodeo clown, but it was hopeless. The herd was in full rebellion mode. One cow trotted right up to her decorative fountain, and let's just say, it had a short but dramatic life. Karen shrieked, "My property, you monsters!" like she was the lead in a soap opera titled The Petunia Betrayal. Meanwhile, I was trying so hard not to laugh that I nearly dropped my coffee. By now, the neighbors had noticed. You know the type. The ones who pretend to hate drama but grab popcorn the second it starts. Heads popped over fences. Phones came out. And right there, in broad daylight, they witnessed what will forever be known as the Great Cow Rebellion of 2025. Karen wasn't done, though. She bolted to her car, slammed the door, and floored it, straight into the mud at the end of her driveway. Turns out her Toyota Corolla wasn't built for off-roading. The cows gathered around like a judgmental audience, watching her spin her tires and sink deeper. I half considered handing them little scorecards. Then came the familiar sound of a patrol car pulling up. The sheriff stepped out, already shaking his head, clearly fighting a laugh. "Ma'am," he said, staring at Karen, now covered in mud, grass, and bits of her once-perfect garden. "I told you yesterday, this isn't your property. And just for the record, trespassing cows can't be fined. But reckless landscaping? That's another story." Karen froze. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, then released a squeal so high-pitched even the cows paused to listen. As if on cue, they all mooed together, the most satisfying mic drop in agricultural history. Once the sheriff left, Karen slinked back into her house, looking like a defeated movie villain. I leaned against the porch railing, shaking my head while my cows strutted back to their pasture like heroes returning from battle. I poured myself another cup of coffee, knowing this wasn't over, not by a long shot. By midday, that fence wasn't just wood anymore. It was a symbol, a line between reason and ridiculousness, between ranch life and HOA tyranny. And Karen? She spent the rest of the day glaring, no doubt planning her next move with a ruler, a map, and several illegal hedge strategies. The moral here: never underestimate three things: a rancher's patience, a cow's intelligence, or the sheer absurdity of someone who thinks cutting through a fence is a valid commuting plan. Because sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge. It has 4 legs, a tail, and perfect comedic timing. But just when I thought Karen had peaked, she found a way to outdo herself. What came next was chaos, karma, and pure HOA madness, all served cold. It began the next morning when I stepped outside for some peace and saw something new glinting in the sun. Karen had bought a massive, over-the-top security camera and mounted it high on a pole at the edge of her yard, pointed straight at my ranch. It looked less like home security and more like the start of a reality show called Keeping Up with the Cows. I figured the chaos had run its course, so I shrugged it off and went about my chores. But the cows, oh, those mischievous, glorious cows, had other plans. They'd fully embraced their newfound fame and clearly decided that their next act would be nothing short of legendary. Bessie the Brave, now the self-appointed general of the herd, led the charge like she was orchestrating a bovine revolution. This wasn't your everyday grazing session. This was a strategic operation. The cows marched right into Karen's yard, deliberately targeting every symbol of HOA perfection they could find. Her mailbox trembled, her bird bath wobbled, and her poor decorative garden gnomes were relocated, mostly by hoof, into new avant-garde positions across her lawn. One cow even leaned against her mailbox, giving it a smug little nudge, as if to say, "You don't run this neighborhood, Karen." Karen burst out of her house like a general going into battle, wielding a broom like a sword. "Stop them! Call animal control!" she yelled. I tried to step in, but honestly, it was far too late. The cows had claimed victory before the fight even began. Neighbors gathered instantly, some laughing, some filming, all bearing witness to what could only be described as pure, unfiltered chaos. Karen screamed like the world was ending, while Bessie and her crew strutted across the lawn like they owned the place. Then came the pièce de résistance. In a desperate attempt to restore order, Karen tried to herd the cows herself. Now, if you've never seen someone in heels and yoga pants attempt to wrangle a 900-pound cow across a yard of churned-up mud, let me save you the trouble. It's a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle. Her campaign lasted all of 12 seconds before she slipped, crashed into a flower bed, and somehow managed to tie herself up in her own garden hose. The cows slowed down just for a moment, as if pausing to admire her form, then continued their slow-motion conquest. That's when I called the sheriff. Not out of anger this time, but because this situation had officially crossed into documentary-worthy territory. When the sheriff arrived, he took one look at the scene, Karen covered in mud, cows lounging like royalty, neighbors cheering, and just sighed. "Ma'am," he said, trying to maintain his composure while clearly suppressing laughter, "the cows aren't leaving. And technically, your property damage complaints don't hold much weight against livestock. You might want to rethink your approach." Karen's face turned red, part fury, part mud. She opened her mouth to protest when Bessie, once again proving her leadership, sauntered up to the last remaining garden gnome. With the precision of a professional athlete, she nudged it straight into Karen's freshly painted fence. The gnome exploded into colorful shards, leaving Karen frozen in place, staring in utter disbelief. The neighborhood erupted. People laughed, clapped, and some even cheered for the cows. Even the sheriff had to bite his lip to keep from bursting out laughing. After a few more minutes of standoff, Karen finally admitted defeat and stormed back inside, slamming her door with dramatic flair. The cows, now undisputed champions, wandered back toward their pasture like soldiers returning from victory. I stood there sipping my coffee, trying not to laugh too hard as I surveyed the battlefield. My fence was intact, my herd was happy, and Karen's reign of HOA terror had been officially demoted to myth. By the end of the week, word had spread across the neighborhood. People drove by just to see the famous Karen fence and the heroic cows that defended it. The story had become local legend, the rancher versus HOA Karen. My cows, now minor celebrities, grazed casually near her yard like they were posing for a victory parade. Karen tried to complain again, but the sheriff, now clearly enjoying this saga, told her, "Ma'am, maybe next time just build a moat." And with that, the legend was sealed. The fence stood tall, the cows ruled peacefully, and Karen learned a life-changing lesson: never challenge a rancher's patience or a cow's sense of humor. Because some lessons aren't taught in HOA meetings. They're learned knee-deep in mud, surrounded by broken gnomes, and punctuated by the sound of mooing triumph. And trust me, around here, everyone will forever remember the day the cows won. So, if you enjoyed this little showdown of fences, fury, and farmyard justice, make sure to subscribe. Because the next story? Let's just say justice gets even sweeter.